Hi everyone. Today we're going to look at the game from round 4 from the Tao Memorial featuring Vladimir Kramnik with the white pieces versus Vishy Anand with the black pieces. This is a really instructive game and it shows you the value of accumulating small advantages. That's basically the theme of this lesson right here. Let's see. Game started out e4 from Kramnik, e5 from Anand, knight f3, of course attacking the pawn, knight c6, bishop c4. This is known as the Giuoco piano or Italian opening, and this means different things to different players. For some, it's an attempt to advance in the center and start a really fast attack. A lot of players play c3, b4. Okay, there we go. This is Giuoco piano proper because actually after knight f6 it would be two knights game since this bishop is not on c5. So let's make it proper. So after bishop c5 is the Giuoco piano, and like I said, for some players, they like to play this as white to try to start a quick attack, and then for some in the minds of other players, they like to play a slow, quiet game, and it's all depending on your style. So some players will play c3 with the idea of playing d4 really quickly. Of course, we had the famous Evans Gambit. With these type of ideas, we have our positional lines, of course. For instance, like castle, c3, knight f6, d4, e takes, check, and we have so many different lines that are possible here. Notice the isolated pawn there. So this is a very ancient opening, and it's going to come in and out of favor throughout the years. So why is it back in style now, so to speak? You're seeing more and more games featuring Bishop C4 as opposed to the old standby Ruy Lopez with Bishop B5. And the reason why is pretty simple, and it's called the Berlin Wall. The Berlin defense is very, very tough nut to crack, and grandmasters are basically tired of having to play against that, and so therefore, and thanks to Vladimir Kramnik for bringing that line back into practice, it's proven very, very difficult uh, for white players to be able to win games against black. So therefore, they're starting to play these Giuoco piano type positions with the idea of getting similar positions to the Ruy Lopez, but down the road. So basically, playing a slow maneuvering game and then hoping to get uh, into similar positions of the Ruy Lopez and basically outplaying the opponent later, keeping pieces on the board and just hoping to outplay the opponent at a later stage of the game. So you're seeing kind of a revival of this old opening, which was first mentioned in manuscript in 1490. So that is a long, long time ago. Okay, so let's go on. So after bishop c5, castle, and just note that there's many different ways to play. The main line, or the older idea is definitely c3, with the idea of playing d4. But there's many many different options that can be played here. Kramnik chose castle, knight f6, hitting the center, d3, protecting the center, castles. And you look at the position, it's symmetrical, doesn't really look like anything is going on too much. And this is basically the type of game white is trying to play. Just keep the pieces on the board and erect a solid position and outplay the opponent. h3, d6, d5 is possible, but black has to be careful because many times this pawn on e5 comes under scrutiny after a while and gets a lot of pressure placed on it, from this rook. And sometimes white is able to build up against this pawn and put a lot of pressure on it. But sometimes you'll see grandmasters playing the d5. Anand opts for the solid d6, and there's c3 again with this idea. Notice that this pawn is not protected. So now I can tell you that c3 is not only for the idea of playing d4, but b4, and subsequently b5, driving the knight away from the center, an old-time classical principle. And also in combination with a4, sometimes giving this bishop a hard time, where it's in danger of being trapped. And it's a more positional way to play. Anand plays a6, preparing to tuck that bishop away in case it is attacked. Rook e1, protecting the pawn. And there it is, bishop a6. Bishop a7. Kramnik moves his bishop. And again, similar to the Ruy Lopez, white doesn't want to lose his bishop right away. For instance, knight a5 and knight b3. So therefore, the bishop goes back. Now let's go back and look at some subtleties of the position. Before a6, possible is, for instance, knight a5, but then bishop e5 is possible. And let's say a6, bishop a4, and then b5, and then bishop can escape. So therefore, after c3, a6, besides bringing the bishop back to a7, knight a5 is a reality in winning the bishop here. So if white is not alert and say plays I don't know, like this traditional looking move, for lack of a better word, just a regular normal looking move, then he might wind up losing the bishop pair here. Again, that's not a loss for white, but it is a strategic concession early in the game just to drop the bishop pair like that. So of course these players have a lot of experience, and they're looking at these little nuances like that. Now at the rook e1, again, black does have an option here to gain the bishop pair. And I think that's always something that black should try to keep in mind in the Giuoco piano. This bishop is very important. So from here, Nine had a chance to gain the bishop pair. Play could go b4, knight takes c4, b takes c5, right? White, you know, wants to keep it even as far as bishops are concerned. And then perhaps knight a5, and c takes. And now it gets interesting. Queen takes d6, and then after bishop a3, c5 is forced. And then d4 happens. And black is in some trouble. So after b6, trying to maintain this, then what happens to this pawn? It just gets captured. And black would be in trouble just like that. Um, Therefore, instead of queen takes d6 there, c takes d6 is forced. And we see that white has this pawn preponderance in the center. But other than that, white has some slight pressure on the position here. And say after bishop e6, knight bd2, rook c8, I think black is just fine. So that was an option for Anand to try to snatch that bishop here. So instead, and even here for Kramnik, instead of playing rook e1, perhaps he could have just moved his bishop back to b3 there in order to avoid that scenario. So after knight a5, then bishop c2. So after rook e1, bishop a7, because perhaps Anand didn't like the line with b4, etc., etc., so he moves his bishop out the way, and bishop b3. So as you saw there in those little simple moves, there's like a lot of subtleties there. Obviously Anand knows he could capture the bishop here, but he didn't like the lines that those sample lines I just showed you with the pawn on c, losing the dark squared bishop, the pawn stuck on the d file, bishop a3, etc., etc. So he moves his bishop first. Then Kramnik realized, okay, now he's gonna threaten. He's gonna play knight a5. So there's bishop b3, and there's a lot of that shows you the subtleties that go on in grandmaster games, and that's why you have to try to seek the understanding of the moves, and not just play a6 bishop a7 and not really understanding the subtleties of what's going on. So bishop b3, h6. Now again, black's bishop is way over here in a7, so this h6 pawn takes the duty of guarding this g5 square from the pin of this bishop on c1. Knight bd2, rook e8, knight f1. And if you're familiar with the Ruy Lopez, you know the path of that knight, right? Sometimes the knight goes to e3, sometimes it goes to g3. The idea is to go on to f4. And there's some differences here, of course. One of them is the bishop is over here, right? Now some variations of the Ruy Lopez, this bishop ends up on the c file, like for instance in your archangel variations, and also your some lines of the Berlin with bishop c5. So it is interesting, and I'm sure these masters have studied like these little nuances, whereas I haven't. But in other lines of the Ruy Lopez, this bishop will be on e7. So rook e8, knight f1, transferring over to the king side. Bishop e6, Bishop c2. Kramnik does not want to trade. Again, similar themes to the Ruy Lopez. And now d5. Now, Anand feels that he has adequately supported this pawn. He has the rook on e8, knight here, and he feels safe in contesting the white center. He takes d5. So now there's an interesting moment in the game. White gives up his influence in the center, and he has this semi backward pawn here on d3. The pawn can advance, but then he has to consider moves like e4. Now, looking at this position, I think black is just fine and is equal in the game. So I'm not too sure about white's opening, but I just think that he just wanted to get a decent position, just so like a playable position. Because here I think black is just fine. He has centers, pieces are developed. I mean, all he has to do is pretty much just play like queen d7 and bring the other rook over, and his development is complete. He even has a target on d3 to attack. In some lines, this knight can go here to h5 and then to f4. So he has just a fine game. So let's see. Knight g3. Again, this is all typical ideas and motifs influencing f4 square, f5, excuse me. So now the bishop hops back out in action. Now I think this is a small error by Anand, and I think he underestimated white's opportunities in the position. I think here, perhaps, this move a5, and it's counterintuitive because he figured, hey, he's moved to a6 already. Why move that pawn again when there's other things that he could be doing? I think a5 is a good move here because it stifles the black queen side. Black cannot play b4 here. And then move the bishop back to c5, and again then maybe start pressuring this pawn right here. And I think a5 is also important because remember what I said earlier about this e pawn coming under pressure from the knight here and the rook, and then in other circumstances maybe even the queen can join in putting pressure on this pawn. So a5 stops the idea of b4 and b5 that was mentioned earlier, driving this knight away, which is now one of the main defenders of the e pawn. So Anand does bishop c5, and now Kramnik plays b5. Excuse me, b4. Now b5 is not a threat immediately because the a6 pawn is there. So now transfers the bishop to the king side for defensive purposes, which is a good idea by Anand. But again, maybe maybe a5 first. But perhaps he was worried about the immediate occupation of knight to f5, the f5 square. So now we see this idea, but Kramnik cannot accomplish it tactically yet because this rook is not protected. So after a4, g6, again, all typical Ruy Lopez moves, keeping the knight out of these squares, and in some cases planning the fianchetto. Notice how useful the bishop is in protecting the h6 square from this bishop on c1. Kramnik plays bishop b2. Now the rook is protected and b5 is threatened. So got to keep an eye on that e5 pawn. Anand decides to stop the advance with b5. It's a double-edged move because it does kind of weaken the dark squares on the king side, and this pawn complex on the queen side is a little suspect. Again, typical of the Roy Lopez. Kramnik plays knight e4 because what else was weakened after b5? Now this is looking like a good outpost in the future. So knight e4 was played. Rook b8. And now Anand is willing to give up the A file. Bishop returns. Bishop c1. Knight d7. Now Anand might have some vague ideas about playing f5. However, it seems like it's tactically flawed here. This bishop is unprotected after the knight moves to d7. So first, that must be addressed. Bishop takes b3, queen takes b3. Again, this pawn is pinned. So again, f5 is not happening. Rook e6. The rook is moving along the third rank now. And white exchanges. A takes b5. A takes b5. And here we can see the beginning of Kramnik's brilliance here. It's like this game reminds me of the old Kramnik, like the Kramnik that beat Kasparov in the brain games in 2000 and 2001. So let's look at the weaknesses in the black position real quick. The main weakness here for black is going to be this a5, this b5 pawn. And we're going to see how Kramnik just gradually puts the pressure on that pawn. But like I always say, and as you can read about in some chess books, is that you usually need more than one weakness to win the game. But what happens usually is by attacking and pressurizing one weakness, then the opponent usually winds up making another weakness somewhere else on the board. And then that's usually what causes the position to fall apart. Is the effort to defend usually creates a lot of stress in some other sector of the board where your opponent is able to exploit, and next thing you know, it's just too much for one player to handle, and the position falls apart. So let's see what happened. So first let's look at these features. We see this B pawn that's kind of like an isolated pawn, even though there's a pawn here. The knight is kind of like almost like awkwardly placed here, even though it's watching over this pawn. This rook is kind of forced to guard the b5 pawn. Another feature of the position is the possession of this a file. Black also has to watch these squares, which are weak and must be guarded by pieces to keep white from penetrating. And his king side is a little weakened by these pawn advances. Now on the black side, Let's get rid of some of the colors. On the black side, this d3 pawn is basically white's main weakness or target that he would like to attack. However, this pawn is really hard to get to because of the lack of coordination of the white pieces, of the black pieces. This knight right here is very strong, and it's kind of like it keeps that rook from even coming to the D or F file. This rook is passively placed on B8. The queen really has nowhere to go, and this knight probably needs to go to F6 and try to trade off the knight on E4. So what we see here is that black's pieces are pretty bad in this position, and this is what I think, in combination with the slight pawn weakness, is that the bad placement of the places gives white a nice advantage here. So Kramnik plays bishop e3. Again, exploiting the weakness of the dark squares. Notice f5 cannot be played because of the position of the rook. There's the move I suggested, knight f6, because this piece is just too powerful, and there's an attack on the pawn. Rook a d1. Knight takes e4, and believe me, Kramnik is relieved. Not Kramnik, Anand is relieved to be able to do that, just to get some breathing room. D takes e4. Of course, there's a tempo that white is happy to take. Queen goes here, e8, and again there's a little pressure here on e5, but the main attack is on this pawn right here. So let's keep going. Knight d8. Some idea of c6, right? Just solidifying everything. Now the other rook goes and takes over the a file. Again, similar ideas, but Kramnik's also anticipating moves like c6. But then this rook will have access to the 7th rank. So knight bd7. So for a move like c6, right, it's like one problem is taken care of. This rook would just simply go back to d1, and then say after knight bd7, then a move like that is possible, just piling up. So knight b7 was played right away. There it is, rook a7, c6, rook d1, knight d6. Again, these squares are very problematic for Anand here. Okay, he blocks the entrance of the rook, the other rook, to the 7th rank, and also in some instances he would like to bring his knight to c4. Now, looking at the position, notice that even though the b5 pawn has been secured, there's another weakness on the board, and that's this pawn, and that has to be constantly looked over and watched by black. Now with this move, knight d6, notice that Anand just happens to be attacking the e4 pawn. Thus, knight d2 is played. Rook a8. Of course, he wants to relieve himself and trade off some material. Rook d8-1, just maintaining control over the open file. Rook takes. Rook takes. So just keep your eye there now. So there's some pressure here. Now it's a long way off, but this is how games are won, right? It's not always just a big check, combination, and the fork at the end and checkmate. It's just little things like occupying, the seventh rank, occupying the c5 square, etc., etc. Slowly building up the position. And compare the pieces. Look at white's pieces and their scope, and compare them with the black pieces, and you'll see who's better. Rook e7. Again, Anand is a former world champion also, and he knows the danger of the position, and so therefore he wants to relieve himself in the position and trade down. Kramnik knows better. The pawn structure is quite symmetrical, and if all the pieces are traded off, the game will probably end in a draw. But Kramnik realizes he has the better pieces, so therefore he wants to hold on to this. And now we have ideas of bishop to c5. Remember I told you about this pawn as being a weakness also. So Kramnik immediately starts attacking it. Rook c7. Again, rook back on defensive duties. Queen a2. Again, just threatening to bring the rook here now. Just penetrating further and further in the position. And notice how Kramnik uses one weakness, in this case the attack on the c6 pawn, as a springboard to attack attack black in another area. So he uses the c6 pawn, right, as a springboard to put his rook on a8. Also note bishop b6 is possible, also attacking the rook. King g7. So Anand wants to clear the back rank, anticipating the invasion. First, bishop b6 is played. Rook to b7. And bishop c5. Now the knight is being attacked. And this is a very interesting position to me because, like, when I was watching the game, one of the ideas that popped into my mind was bringing the knight here to b3 and to c5, putting more pressure. But then I was thinking, well, then Kramnik has to deal with the Anand's knight coming to c4. So I was thinking, like, wow, maybe he'll trade his bishop for this knight and then do that. But then it's hard to see how he would continue the pressure. So what Anand does here, what Kramnik does here, is he avoids the immediate trade of pieces and continues to improve on the position, which was very instructive to me, because I was thinking of all kind of plans, like for instance f3, which would support this pawn on e4 and free this knight up to go here and here, and then trade this off. And although you will have pressure here, it's still hard to break through. So bishop e7, rook goes back, rook b8. a7, rook d8, bishop b6. And these players were making a time control. This is move 39. Rook c8, bishop c7, and you can see the idea is still kind of up in the air of actually exchanging this piece. Queen d7, interesting move by Anand, putting itself in direct alignment with the queen, but there's really no way that Anand Kramnik can tactically benefit from this. Bishop b6, the queen goes back. G3, of course they made the time control, and it's almost just like a waiting move. So bishop g5, perhaps Kramnik's idea was to play h5, h4, excuse me. So bishop g5. So now we see Anand wanting to trade his bishop off, and perhaps again stop the idea of knight here and knight here. But the immediate threat is just simply to capture the knight and then take this pawn. That's the immediate threat on board right now. So this is what happens. Now this knight is threatened and this knight is threatened. Bishop takes d2. Bishop takes d2. And bishop takes c3. And this is an interesting sequence of moves to me, because Kramnik had to see, this sacrifice of a pawn, but he realized that his position is so dominant that he can give up material. So we still see this pressure along the 7th rank here. So now rook e7, attacking the queen. And of course the queen is forced to stay in the vicinity here of the f7 pawn. Queen g8. And there's a good move by Kramnik. So now you see the pawn can be captured with check. There's a pin on the king. There will be no capture, no f takes e6. Queen f8. King g2. It's a nice waiting move. Black is almost in like a Zugzwang type position. Rook d8. The bishop drops back. He doesn't even bother capturing that pawn. Bishop d4. Of course, Anand wants to trade, wants white to take here, and then a nice pass pawn and race it down the board. Queen takes c6. And notice how the attack on the f pawn, right, one weakness, leads to the positional collapse in another area on the board, on the queen side. And that's the idea that I want to show you. So we see here this pawn, it's been watched by the rook the whole time, and white was attacking it, but then all of a sudden the attack switched over to the f7 pawn on the queen side, and white was able to generate so much pressure there that eventually black had to abandon that pawn. So he abandoned this pawn, right, to try to seek some relief in the position. So instead of bishop d4, if he just tried to go back, for instance, rook c8, and then a simple move is possible, like rook takes f7, for example, with check, followed by the subsequent capture of the rook on c8. So this is why that move was important. Why Anand had to move. I just want to go back so you can see this the transition. So again, right here, move 37, you see basically it looks like white is just attacking on the queen side primarily. Right, the whole attack is basically over there, but slowly but surely there's some slight pressure there, and then you see the transfer of pieces to the king side, starting with that move right there. Now the bishop is on the d file. Now the rook comes to the e file after the sacrifice of this pawn, and now all of a sudden there's an all-out assault on f7, and now the problem, now it's like the game is just totally switched around. So this assault on f7 takes place, and we see the rook is defending a pawn that's not even attacked. And even here, white could have played this discovery rook c7 here. There's really nothing black can do here. Of course, if rook takes c7, then this bishop takes f8. So I guess a critical line would be something like that, um, like rook e8. No, that's not critical at all, because bishop just takes f8 with check. So there's nothing critical here at all. That's just a winning continuation for Kramnik. Yeah, just rook c7. Yeah, that just wins on the spot. Okay, so Kramnik, however, played king g2. Now I'm not gonna say he missed it or what, but I mean he still has a superior position here. But rook c7. Oops, excuse me. Yeah, just rook c7. Just seems like that's it. That's all she wrote right there. Yeah, I'll go on the record. Let's say he missed. We'll say he missed that move. Okay, king g2 was played, and now rook d8 was played, and possibly Anand spotted the idea himself that rook c7 was possible. And now, for instance, if like rook d8, now queen e8 is possible. You see, and this is now black is still busted, but he has a little bit of life, and in the position, a little bit of fight left. So now bishop c5 is played. Anand realizes he cannot bring the rook back because of the same idea. If rook c8, then the idea is popping off again. So bishop c5, bishop d6, just going for this trade. And what can he do? He just simply, the material just falls. And again, that's like the main theme, is just notice how the attack in one area of the board led to the collapse in another area. King g8, queen takes b5, and the game is pretty much over here. Rook b8, and it's just a good good ending combination by Kramnik. Discovery against the queen. So of course, we're not going to see king takes here. And non resigned at this point. I'll show you the end. That what would have happened if queen takes. Then there's of course the real obvious queen takes here, and then king g7. Just giving like a sample type of line. Bishop takes d4. Just real keep it simple as possible. E takes, and then queen e5 check. That's winning. For instance, queen f6 takes, and there's too many pawns. This one's gone. This one's gone. And if the king somehow by miracle got over there, these pawns would be gone, and this pawn is going nowhere. So that's what happens if queen takes. If king takes, then just simply queen to d7 check, and this guy is getting picked up. And then again, that's another loss. That's another losing line. So that was a fantastic game by Kramnik in my eyes, and it reminded me of the games that I used to see from Kramnik in the, like early 2000s. And every now and then you'll see a game like that where he shows so much positional understanding. You wonder how like he ever loses. But like I said, this game made an immediate impression on me because just of how the attack started off on the queen side. The attack started off on the queen side, then it switched to the king side, and here's the start of that queen side attack. And just like a very rich strategic game. So I hope you guys enjoyed that game as much as I did. And if you do, please comment, like, and subscribe, and support the channel. And I'm getting ready to look at some other games from round 4, and I will be uploading those shortly. So I hope you enjoy the analysis, and I will see you in a few minutes.